A man's malehood is tied to his plumbing. That is, the biology with which he was born that establishes his male identity. Then that male becomes a boy. Boyhood is tied to dependency and immaturity. So we got a couple of hoods. We got malehood, that's strictly biological identity. You've got boyhood, which is dependency and immaturity. But the goal of malehood is manhood. And in the Bible, manhood is defined as responsibility under God. That is, from God's point of view, a male has not fully arrived to be a man until he's operating under the rule of God in relationship to God. So the question is, which hood are you in? Just malehood? Immaturity, irresponsibility, boyhood, regardless of your age. You still holding on to your mama's apron string? But then there is biblical manhood. God called for 3 conferences a year. 3 men's conferences. We just have one. 3 times a year, all the males in Israel are to come before the Lord their God. There were to be no exceptions, no females allowed. Only the males, all of them, were to appear before the Lord God 3 men's conferences every year. Why did he call only the men? The man was created first because God would hold him ultimately responsible for that which was put under his care and in his charge. So manhood is tied to responsibility under God. The absence of that diminishes authentic manhood. Now, why did God call this meeting? Why was this meeting, 3 men's conferences every year, called by God? Let me show you something in chapter 34. He says in verse 10, "Then God said, behold, I'm going to make a covenant." Verse 14, "For you shall not worship any other God, for the Lord, whose name is jealous, is a jealous God. Otherwise you might make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land." Verse 27, "Then the Lord said to Moses, write down these words, for in accordance with these words I have made a covenant with you and with Israel." And then at the end of verse 28, "And he wrote on the tablet the words of the covenant." This is a word that you've heard me bring up many times, and it is the key word to define our relationship with God, and in this case, the man's responsibility under God. All the men. The word covenant means a divinely created bond. It was an officially established relationship between God and his people. And the word that God would use about an official relationship is the word covenant. He would covenant with us. God called all the men of Israel because he was establishing an official protocol, an official relationship that was to be authorized authorized to the men and then spread out from the men to that which was their responsibility. That's called a covenant. Covenants are always official. They're not casual. They're in the spiritual realm. They are the mechanism through which God favors flow. His favor flows through his covenant. A synonym for the word covenant is covering. A covenant covers. As I've defined it before, it's like having an umbrella in the rain. The umbrella covers you. Doesn't stop it from raining, it just stops it from raining on you because you are covered. Now you can have an umbrella but not be under it. Well, even if you are in the covenant, if you are not under the covenant, you go uncovered. So we have a generation today of uncovered men. They may go to church, they may be Christian, but they're not covered. And if you are an uncovered man, that means it's raining on all the folk in your life too. Because you're uncovered, they're getting wet. God called all the men to covenant with them because they were to cover not only their own lives and their own family, but in this context, the whole nation. So the question on the floor was to bring all the men in alignment with the covenant so that they would be covered by God, so that that which they are responsible for in the covenant would be covered too. So the positioning of a man underneath God's covenantal covering would determine the well-being of the whole nation. The issue of the covenant is alignment. See, a lot of men are pushing buttons, cussing and fussing, and nothing's opening. The wife not changing, the children not changing, the career's not changing, but they pushing all the buttons, and God is saying, I'm waiting for you to get in alignment. Because if you will get in alignment under me, you'll see some power that you didn't know you had. But because you're out of alignment and not operating in relationship under my divine rule, all your buttons aren't working. So God would call all the men of Israel to 3 conferences a year to get them back in alignment, to get them functioning underneath God's covenantal covering. A man is not living up to his manhood if God can't tell him what to do. If you can overrule God, if God clearly says this and you say that, you say, you're not my boss, man. I'm the man. I make the final decisions. You only come when I want you. You do not tell me what to do. Now, everybody knows men don't like folk telling them what to do, including God. Because plenty of men, when you say God says this, will go, but I think, but I feel, but I ain't into that. Okay, tell your boss that tomorrow at work. Adonai means I'm your boss man. I am the one who sets the governing guidelines for your decisions. And he says, I want all 3 relationships with you. I want to be your power. I want to be in relationship. And I want to have the right to overrule you. If God can't overrule you, you're not a man as far as he's concerned, you're a punk. Because you've not given him permission to be God over you or me. Whenever we buck him, we step outside of the covenant and we're no longer covered. No matter how much church you go to, no matter how much religious talk you talk, If he doesn't operate those three roles, your power, your relationship, and your ruler, 1 Corinthians 11, verse 3 says, God the Father is over Christ. And then it says, and every man is under Christ. So if you name the name of Jesus Christ, if you declare that you are a Christian, that means that you are to be operating underneath the lordship of Jesus Christ, which means Jesus Christ has the final say-so over your life in every area. There is to be no area where he can't overrule you. Unless Jesus Christ has the final say-so, he is not Lord and you are not covered. And then it says, a woman comes underneath a man. But a woman is supposed to only come underneath a man who's covered, so that she too is covered. Because if he not covered, it's a good chance she not covered. And so he called all the men to be under the covenant or under the covering. Psalm 25, verses 12 to 14. Oh, this is sweet. Watch this. Who is the man who fears the Lord? He will instruct him in the way he should go. His soul will abide in prosperity, and his descendants will inherit the land. Watch this. The secret of the Lord is for those who fear him, and he will make them know his covenant. That's why Exodus 33 is so critical. Verse 7. Now Moses used to take the tent and pitch it outside the camp, a good distance from the camp, and he called it the tent of meeting. Verse 9. Whenever Moses entered the tent, the pillar of the cloud would descend and stand at the entrance of the tent, and the Lord would speak with Moses. Verse 11. Thus the Lord used to speak to Moses face to face, just as a man speaks to his friend. When Moses returned to the camp, his servant Joshua, the son of Nun, a young man, would not depart from the tent. Then Moses said to the Lord, see, you say to me, bring up this people, but you yourself have not let me know whom you will send with me. I need some more information, God. Moreover, you have said, I have known you by name, and you have also found favor in my sight. Now, therefore, Lord, I pray you, if I have found favor in your sight, let me know your ways, that I might know you, so that I might find favor in your sight. Consider too that the nation or the people you've given me. Verse 17, the Lord said to Moses, I will also do this thing of which you have spoken, for you have found favor in my sight, and I have known you by name. Then Moses said, I pray you, show me your glory. And God said, I myself will make my goodness pass before you and proclaim the name of the Lord before you. You see what he did? He didn't wait for the conference. Says Moses built his own tent. met with God regularly face to face because he knew the closer he was to God, the more information he'd get from God. And the more information he got from God, the better he would be able to fulfill his responsibilities in life. Too many men have failed to come under the covenant, bringing chaos to marriage, chaos to parenting, chaos to the culture, chaos to society. And I don't mean by that women don't have a responsibility. You are to be hearing from God. But you can't do that coming to church. You got to have your own tent. You got to have your own meeting place. You got to have your own regular interface with the living God to pitch a tent. The passage goes on to say that a lot of folk, when Moses went to the tent, would stand at their tent. In other words, they didn't go to the tent. They just stood and watched what Moses was doing. Don't come in and watch my tent. Get your own tent so that you can hear God for yourself. Speak into your mind, speak into your thoughts, speak into your circumstances. He says, and God met with Moses face to face. If we could get men, pulpit to pew and back again, to pursue a relationship with God, we would find things changing in our circumstances. We wouldn't need to run and get a divorce. We wouldn't need to abandon our kids. We wouldn't need to see the culture fall apart. But because men won't come to the conference that God is setting up, and because men will not pitch a tent for their ongoing relationship with God between the 3 conferences a year, we never hear from God. We just hear sermons from man. God's covenant is the key to the game of life. And your proximity to that determines how the game of life works or does not work in the life of a man, in the life of any Christian, but particularly the life of a man, because he's calling all the men. So it is time now that there would be no more excuses, that we do not give excuses as men why we don't have it. By getting into proximity with God, you say, but I'm busy, I don't have time, I work, I do this, I do that, I do that. That's an excuse. How can you be too busy to meet with somebody